Moving forward to our final talking point of overthrows today, Australia Day, something that has come under the microscope. I've heard, Pat Cummins has said that it comes up every year. And
Yep.
basically, for those of you who don't know, 26th of January, I believe, is when Australia Day is celebrated, because that's when the fleets of the colonizers first landed in Australia. So there is a bit of a marred history over there, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be controversial. It should be. And I get it. Like, if Scotty Boland's part of your squad and you're having that sort of a celebration, I understand where Pat Cummins is coming from. But he is, of course, the woke prince that was promised for cricket. Pat Cummins, of course, he said that, maybe we should choose another day. That's a strong statement coming out of him, because, the surveys suggested that people under the age of 30 and thereabouts are more so aligned with Pat Cummins' worldview, and Steve Smith also threw his weight behind his captain. And then, the older generation, not so much. So it is definitely a talking point, Jarrod.
I think Ashley Gardner made a big, strong statement about it last year. If I think it was last year, certainly another Indigenous cricketer, probably, after Jason Gillespie, Australia's most prominent Indigenous cricketer. Cricket has a bad history with Indigenous people, so it's just, cricket's always on a delicate place. Look, the thing about Australia Day is, here's the funny thing. When I grew up, I don't remember anyone giving a shit about Australia Day.
Really?
I can tell you a single person who celebrated Australia Day. My auntie she goes, "Oh, I think we put flags up," and she loves Australia Day now. And I said, "I've been at your house on Australia Day. I saw nothing in your house, right? There was no celebrations. We didn't do anything on Australia Day that we didn't do on any other day. I think it was slightly bigger in some other cities outside of Melbourne, to be fair. Australia Day sort of becomes popular partly on the back of, and this is going to sound weird, but there's an alternative radio station in Australia that does the top 100 alternative songs. And it kind of it sort of has a little bit of that. Plus, during the 90s, Australia becomes a lot more nationalistic. And, that's when they start wearing the baggy greens, right? Like, we have to all dress the same. And, John Howard becomes the Prime Minister, and there's almost a throwback to patriotism and all those sorts of things. Racist parties start springing up, like the One Nation Party and things like that. But when I grew up, I just don't remember it. I mean, I don't know a single person in my street who ever did any celebration of Australia Day. Now, compare that to India, which celebrate the exact same day, right?
Yeah, the Republic Day or something.
Yeah, that's quite big. Like, it's a thing. And so it does show you how different it is, and it's become a big issue. I always think about these things in a very similar way. If you would explain Australia Day to a 6-year-old, which I've had to do, their question is going to be, but why don't they just move the date?
Yeah.
Right?
If you want to celebrate a day for being Australian, which I'm completely for, nationalism is problematic, but we all have an identity, and it's okay to celebrate your identity, right?
Yeah.
As per me. So pick another. That's what Pat Cummins said. He said maybe we should pick a different day.
and it's funny that these whole generations, and I've had fights. As I said, I had a fight with my auntie about this once. And she was like, we shouldn't have to. We've always celebrated that day. And I was like, I must have missed all the celebrations because I didn't see shit for many years, right? Like, I can tell you one thing. My entire life, we celebrated the Melbourne Cup, right? It's a fucking horse race, mate, right? We have a public holiday for it in Melbourne. The whole country stops to watch this fucking horse race, right? Good horse race, 3,200 meters, handicapped. It's got some fun things about it. But the whole country stops to do that. And I remember that happening again and again and again and again and again, right? I must have missed all the Australia Day. The only Australia Day celebrations I'm ever aware of was the fact that there was usually a game on in Adelaide, right? So there was a cricket relationship to Australia Day. It's in the middle of the summer. Chances are you're going to play on that day. And the Triple J Hottest 100 competition. They're the only two things that I ever really associated with Australia Day. As I have said to many Australians who get very angry about this, I celebrate being Australian every day by being Australian. I don't need a specific day. If you do need a specific day, that's great. Why don't we not piss off the Indigenous people, right, by having it on the same day that they felt like their lives all changed, right?
100% agreed.
That's all we're saying, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's a simple thing. And it's not going to go away, right? While cricket is still being played around that period. And that's no one's asking Aussie rules footballers or rugby players or NBA players about this directly all that often, because they're not playing in an Australia Day game. While cricket has a game on Australia Day, it's obviously going to be more of an issue. So I feel sorry for Ashley Gardner, Pat Cummins, the players who don't want it to be changed. The players who do want
Scotty
it to be
Boland, I
changed.
think I've heard Scotty Boland has issues with it, and it makes sense. He's got Indigenous heritage.
And to be fair, also the Indigenous players who don't care, they still get dragged into this as well. And I know I don't know what Jason Gillespie or Darcy Short or Dan Christian. I would assume, certainly in Dan Christian's case, I think he would be pretty against it. But there might be Indigenous players who don't give a shit, right? Or Indigenous players who are like, it's fine. Let's just there are more important issues. All that's fine, but they all get dragged back into it, right?
Yeah.
And it is a little bit ridiculous, and I do feel sorry for the cricket part of it. But to go back to the joke I made about Shoaib Bashir being the Basil D'Oliveira of it, the cricket conversation around Australia Day might be part of the reason that one day it does change, right?
Yeah.
And I personally, I always, from the moment I realized there was an Australian Day and not just a day off at the end of January before I went back to school.
Imagine Australia Day moving from the day when the colonizers' fleets arrived to the day that Pat Cummins chose.
Let's be honest. I was going to say Australia Day should be the 3rd of January. Do you know why?
The first New Year's test?
Yeah. Because I was going to say it should be Boxing Day, but we've already got a holiday for Boxing Day. So we don't. Yeah. Do you know what it should be? It should be the day after Boxing Day or the first day in Sydney, right? That would be absolutely that for me is very Australian. But it's. I think it's great that modern Australian cricket. It's funny. I read Ricky Ponting's book, which is fucking long, right? And there's the first part of it is written by Peter Lawler about his childhood and coming up. It's really interesting. The rest of it, Bayram, is the most boring fucking drivel ever written. It's like I promise you, it's like this big long thing, and there's like a little thing of I went to the gym today in it. It's just like can you not edit some of his diaries out of this, right? And I remember reading it and going, Ricky Ponting lived in Australia at a really interesting time. He's a proper Lonnie working class kid, but he lived in Australia. He grew up in Australia that was becoming really middle class, right? He traveled to Zimbabwe. He played cricket in Sri Lanka, right? He saw the rise of India right in front of his eyes, right? Like, all these incredible things. And you read his book and you're like, did Ricky Ponting notice he was in these countries? Did he, it's really remarkable how little he noticed. And look, there are going to be Australian captains who I don't agree with politically, right? I mean, Mark Taylor, I think, was involved with conservative politics. I don't think he ever got involved, but I think he supports conservative politics. And there would be other Australian cricketers off the top of my head that would be in a similar. In fact, I've got friends who've played and coached in Australia who are, conservatives. But they are in a unique position because they do travel around the world, and they can actually sometimes cut through the quick of things, right? Of the nonsense of of all this sort of stuff, but also they are very much. I've always find it weird when people go, "Oh, celebrities shouldn't talk about this," or "Athletes shouldn't talk about this," and I'm like, look at some of the people who are political commentators. What the fuck have they done to earn it? They just wrote a shitty opinion piece column that was full of absolute nonsense, and suddenly they're an expert on China and Russia, right? And Pat Cummins can't talk about his own country. Fuck off, right?
Absolutely.
When politicians and other people in the world stop talking about sport when they don't know anything about it, we'll allow athletes not to talk about politics and everything else. But you can't stop people talking about what they want. He truly believes this. And this is a really little story just about Pat Cummins. I was contacted by a startup who wanted to do this. They had this idea. I don't really know how to explain it, but it was essentially getting athletes to donate things and then using that money to for environmental causes, but then you would go into a raffle and then you would go on a holiday with Pat Cummins, or or you could bowl to
Oh.
Pat Cummins in the nets or something. I'm just using Pat Cummins because I'm talking about him, but
Mm-hmm.
it might have been the same with Ronaldo or LeBron James. That was the whole idea, was to get to as many
Okay.
famous athletes as possible. And I passed it through to Pat's people because I thought it might be something he really likes, and they were really excited. I don't know if the startup went in. I don't know what happened to the whole idea, but they were really excited because he was like, "This is something that's perfect." He gets to hang out with someone who really wants to hang out with him and help the environment all at the same time. Like, he
Yeah.
genuinely cares about this sort of stuff, right? Not everyone does. You and I both know there's plenty of people that say things just because they say things, right? Like,
Yeah,
you know,
and I love how Pat Cummins, for whatever he is, I mean, of course, he has been this woke ambassador in cricket, but he's not in your face. He does it very like subtly. He's very nonchalant about it. He doesn't. If you actually hear him say these things, it seems like he doesn't care, but he does, because it seems like he's a genuine guy. And it's funny, Jarrod. Just on a closing note, I suppose, how you were mentioning how people keep telling cricketers to shut up. Usman Khwaja was told to shut up,
yeah,
and here he is, Test Cricketer of the Year. Pat Cummins has been told to shut up and focus on his cricket, and here he is, having defended the Ashes in England, having won the ODI World Cup, having won the World Test Championship, still winning consistently before this Test match. You know, they are focusing on the cricket, so maybe you should shut up.
yeah. I remember when Pat Cummins, I think he lost the series early on, and it was after, I think, he'd made the comments about the coal industry and everything, and there was all this stuff about "go woke, go broke," which is one of
Yeah.
those phrases that only exists because it fucking rhymes, because it's nonsensical otherwise. And since that time, he's fucking won everything. Right?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous how much winning he's done since then. In fact, up until Shamar Joseph, he was probably one of the most successful cricketers going around. So look, obviously the whole thing's nonsensical. I've said before, I support Tim Tebow's rights to talk about the abortion issue, despite the fact that I find everything he says stupid and reductive, and doesn't really help anyone at all. But Tim
Yeah.
Tebow really believes about that sort of stuff. He should be allowed to talk about it, right? And whether you agree with it or not, they are still. Everyone is a human being who lives on the planet.
Yeah.
They get to interact with what they want to get to interact with. If your fucking uncle down at the coffee shop is going to talk shit about the flat Earth, right? I think, your favorite footballer should be allowed to talk about it as well. We can laugh at both of them, right?
Yeah.
But that is the thing that they believe really passionately because they've seen a YouTube video about it.